Hello and welcome to round 3 of the Tampa series of podcasts. My guest today is Jordan McCarthy. Jordan, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's start by having you talk about your musical upbringing.
So my musical upbringing started very early in Waukee, Iowa, and I was very fortunate to be in that school district, which while I was there, had numerous ACDA performances. We had a show choir that was nationally ranked, and it was an all-around strong program with many singers, many wonderful directors, really all the way from 6th grade through the end of high school. So that's where I came from, and then I went to Miami of Ohio for my undergrad. And I studied there. I studied voice and conducting. And then I did not complete a degree in education. I completed a degree in performance, realizing that it was slightly too late, and I didn't want to spend 4 more years in school to take a sequence of 4 education courses. So instead, I went on to study Masters of Conducting at Indiana University of Pennsylvania with Dr. Ryan Beacon. And my second year of that, I was a remote student. I would drive in every Saturday for 4 hours of conducting lessons, which Indiana, Pennsylvania is just outside of Pittsburgh. So I was teaching my first teaching job in Toledo, Ohio. And I would drive 6 hours every weekend and I'd go to my classes, and then I'd drive 6 hours back and teach all week, and then I would Skype him in for some of the classes. So some of my conducting lessons were actually quite comical, because he would be in via Skype, and he would be talking to me, and then I would talk to the choir. So the choir would just look at me like what is going on? And of course they knew, I had turned the computer around and introduced him, but they're thinking, this is so strange. The computer talks to Mr. McCarthy, and then Mr. McCarthy says the same things to us, and then we move on. So after that, I taught for 1 year in southern Indiana. So I was in Evansville, Indiana at Bosse High School. And then I found my way down to Harrison here in Lakeland.
Wow. So that's quite a journey, going from Iowa to Ohio, Pennsylvania. You're kind of all over the map, and that's extreme dedication. 6 hours, and then for a 4-hour lessons, and then straight back. My goodness. And so, yeah, I'm from Pennsylvania. I think I know a lot of people, there's a lot of teachers in Pennsylvania. I've had a couple of them on this podcast, and I went to Slippery Rock University, which is a big rival of IUP. But that's it's a kind of a cool coincidence that 2 people that went to Pennsylvania colleges are now so close down here in Florida. That's great.
Sure.
And so have you noticed kind of the regional differences in choirs from your experiences in the North compared to Florida?
Oh yes, there's a huge regional difference in how directors and choirs and the music education system, I think, approaches the priorities of what comes first on the to-do list. And I think that I am perhaps an extreme case of what happens up north, and so I definitely noticed that. I know that my students felt a very big change, and so there is definitely a difference. I think in the north we tend to focus first on tonal production. And how does the vocal mechanism work? Especially correct vowel shapes, making sure the tongue is released, the jaw is dropped. So we start there, and then from there we go on to space in the back, resonance in the front. How much subglottal pressure is there? Is the subglottal pressure consistent? And then after that we start working on other things, which here I know that there's a much larger focus on sight reading and music literacy, which is wonderful. But it does present different challenges. I know that in the North, we could make it cover to cover on a piece of music without someone stopping or without any students getting overwhelmed, and 3/4 of the notes might be wrong. And so you might not get a really good idea of what the piece sounded like, except for, I guess I would say in your mind's eye, but in this case, I suppose it's your mind's ear. So then we would go back to the beginning, and we'd do that maybe 1 or 2 more times, and by the 3rd time, then it would sound more or less like the piece is supposed to sound, and we'd start digging in and working. And we just did that right on words. There was not the same structure and method of using sight reading and using sight reading techniques as we jumped straight into the music. We would do that separately, and then it was understood that students were to kind of connect the dots and apply that on their own, which what I saw with my choirs here was the expectation was definitely to make it through on notes and rhythms first. Once the notes and rhythms are there, then we would move to words or a neutral syllable, which was a very different process than what I was brought up with.
Sure, yeah, and that can cause some or present some different problems and situations. It is good that Florida is so intense about what they do and what their priorities are, and that 9 times out of 10, if you put a piece of music in front of someone or a choir in Florida, they will be able to read it. But then you have to get, to the tone and everything else, whereas in the North they might be a little bit more technical, but might not be as good of sight readers. So it's interesting that it presents some different problems. Can you talk about the difference of teaching at, I'm assuming you were not teaching at a school of the arts in the North, and now you are at a school for the arts, which is Harrison.
Yes, it is. It's remarkably different, and my education path I think has taken me to a number of spots. So when I taught my first year in Toledo, I was at a girls' preparatory school. So it was a Catholic school, and then a public school that was considered kind of inner city, and then down to Harrison. So it has been a complete 180 for 3 years in a row. But teaching at a fine arts high school is really different, because I have the luxury of kind of isolating a lot of things that would normally happen in the choir classroom. So often, we do our best to incorporate sight singing, and then incorporate a little bit of vocal technique stuff into a rehearsal, and I'm given the luxury of really not having to do that. When my students walk into a choral rehearsal, it's not that those things go out the window, but I don't have to focus any time on them. And the reason for that is all freshmen have a year-long sight singing and dictation course. So by the end of their freshman year, for 50 minutes a day, we have covered quite a bit of ground. And so what we need is a refresher, not actual technical time to dig into that subject matter. And then when they get to be juniors and seniors, essentially what we do is kind of a lab class for our juniors and seniors for solo music literature, which encompasses kind of art song history and literature, and choral music literature and history. Literature and history. So those aspects are really isolated, and we get to dig into them separately, which I really enjoy, and really enjoy having time focused and dedicated to those things. And I think it allows me to plan better and run more effective rehearsals and classes.
Sure. And so can you kind of talk us through the breakdown of the choirs that you have at Harrison?
Yes, I have 2 academic choirs, which meet during the school day. So I have a men's chorus and a women's chorus, which The first is obviously all of our tenors and basses, and the second is all of our sopranos and altos. And then after school, we have our top ensemble, which is our mixed ensemble, so the Harrison Chamber Singers, which is, this year it is all of the men, but it is not always all of the men, so that is an audition group for everybody. And we are more or less balanced in that group in terms of men and women. And then we also have two ensembles that are geared a little bit more towards popular music, and those are the Satin Dolls, which is a 16 person women's ensemble that sings more popular genre music. And then we also have an 8-person men's ensemble that does more or less the same thing in a barbershop context. Outside of that, we also have in our vocal tech kind of area, we run a lot of chamber music. So we will, there are some days where I will print out the Salmon Davids, and each group gets 2 Salmon Davids, one on a part, and we are able to work through that as well. And oftentimes we will have groups that do end up performing those on concerts. So that's something that I absolutely love that we can do at Harrison is to have an experience like that for the students.
Sure, and so I was talking with Sabra Hatley earlier yesterday, and she had a similar model. She has a separate men's choir, a separate women's choir, and then she meets with some groups after school. And does that seem like the norm throughout Polk County because of the way your school hours run?
I don't know that seems to be the norm about Polk County. I'm not always familiar with the choirs. I mean, to be quite blunt, I think it's the best model to have. I think it is the only way to really have students exposed to all of the literature that I think they should be exposed to, being men's and women's literature, and then also mixed literature, and having a concise way of kind of a varsity ensemble feel, to have all of your top singers that are not restricted by class conflicts to be in the same choir. So I think many schools in Polk County do that, and I know personally I wouldn't change a thing about that setup.
Right. Yeah, and I think I'm slowly moving that way. I have a beginning concert choir that I'm really right now just treating as a men's and women's choir, but I think next year I'm going to split that apart. But unfortunately, I can't really do the after-school things because my school goes till 3:15, and then there's all these other things they have going on. But I wish that I could do those things, but I do see that there's huge advantages of having men's and women's separate, not only on the time saving, but just having guys all in the classroom at the same time. They're going to act differently if there was women in the classroom and vice versa.
Oh, of course. So that's a really nice aspect to have. The other thing is, and I don't think we all realize that we do this, but as music educators, we do the things and the tools and the techniques that I would use for my tenors and basses are not always the same as what I would use for my sopranos and altos. So when we do dig into vocal technique, it's really nice to be able to approach those separately and not have to stop and say, now tenors and basses for you, it's going to feel like this. When because of the changing male voice, there are times that I would use certain vowel modifications with men that I would ask for something entirely differently with the women. And so there's nothing then that ends up getting lost in translation or where I have to stop and dig into why I might be asking the women to sing an O vowel where the men I would just have them sing eh. Which sounds odd, but then I look at the context in which that happens and I go, yep, 100% every time. So it really is truly beneficial there.
Sure. And so can you talk about the audition process, not only to get into your school, but once you're in your school to get into the top ensembles? I'm always interested to find out what directors do for those kind of things.
Sure. So to get into the school, we audition starting in the 8th grade year and up 8th grade and freshman year. Students are allowed to audition. They need to bring a classical song. Typically in 8th grade and freshman year, that ends up being a folk song. So we get a lot of the now that's what I call greatest hits of the 1790s, with the 24 Italian songs and arias, or a lot of other folk song arrangements that are really nice for that age. So we have one classical piece, and then we also have them do some sight reading, and then I also test their range at that time, so that hopefully we can have a balanced choir. But that being said, balance is always low on the list. I would be happy to bump someone from soprano to alto to allow them to study at Harrison.
Yeah, and so that has to be a tricky thing. You're getting someone as an 8th grader that you have to think about when they're a senior, and that how do you think about that?
The more and more you study vocal pedagogy, the more you can. This always sounds odd to people that don't do this already, but you can look at the shape of someone's forehead, cheekbones, and nose, and kind of anticipate what voice type they might end up becoming. Where on the spectrum of lyric to dramatic they might end up in their mid-20s, and thinking to yourself, all right, so where are they really going to fall? Where do they fall now? Because I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I have plenty of freshmen come in, and freshmen are likely to sing alto 1 because that is the nicest spot for them not to have to deal with the passaggio, and I would rather have them avoid that problem while we teach them how to work through it, and then move them to where their tessitura sits a little bit better. So that is a little bit how we approach the auditions to get into Harrison.
Okay, and then so once they're in Harrison, how do you deal with getting into your top ensembles?
So this is one of my favorite parts about teaching at Harrison. We truly do operate like a miniature college model. So all students do so every semester except for freshmen in the fall semester. Each student gives a voice jury. So each student is required to study with one of our private teachers on staff, and the students share some of the cost, and the department shares some of the cost for each student, and they take weekly lessons. So at the end of each semester, we have voice juries, and that is what I use to place students for a lot of things, chiefly all of our audition to ensembles. And students are kind of given an outline for what their 4 years should look like, and all of our voice teachers are truly wonderful, and they've really bought into this and making it a streamlined concept. So each student knows that in this year they might have to have an Italian and English song, or Italian, German, English, and a musical theater piece, or an opera aria, or an oratorio aria. And then in their last year, we do ask that they end up doing a full portion of a song cycle, so 1 or 2 or 3 things from the same work. And at our juries, what happens is we have I judge, and then their voice teacher judges, and then a third voice teacher from the staff judges. So each student is really put up against the firing squad, so to speak, in that they come in, and there are 3 people that are watching and looking for constructive pieces of criticism to give, and also to tell them, this is wonderful. This is something that you've really improved on over the semester. And I work with 8 really wonderful voice teachers, and it's been fantastic to see, because this was not always how we did juries. This was one of the things that I started when I moved into the position at Harrison. But it's really great to see voice teachers who do not see a student every week, because they are not the primary teacher, be able to give feedback over the course of multiple semesters, to have a set of ears that goes, at the end of your freshman year, the placement was really just not what it needed to be. But now that you're at the end of your sophomore year, or at the beginning of your junior year, it's truly fantastic. The resonance is where it's supposed to be, and the vowel shape is working with that. So it's nice to have all of those things come together.
Yeah, and that's great that you have not only the people that are there all the time, you get someone on the outside kind of looking in, and then that not only does that just protect you from the students and the parents accusing you of things, which I hope doesn't happen, but could. It gives them that just, it's not just him not liking me, which which is not the case, but in their minds, some of them think like things like that.
Sure, and it's always subjective. So I think in any arts field, that's always going to be a problem, because we do have times where 1 or 2 voice teachers will score way higher on a student or way lower on a student than somebody else. But it's always interesting to see. I think almost all of the time, our 3 judges are within. We use like I think it's a 35-point scale, and we are always within about a 2-point range, except for an occasional outlier.
Yeah, that's great. And so, growing up in Iowa, did you have a moment that you decided or realized that you wanted to dedicate your life to music?
Yes and no. I mean, I know there were a lot of points where I thought, this is what I want to do, or this is what I need to be doing. But I really held on to other things for a long time. I went to Miami University on a full tuition chemical engineering scholarship, and I held on to that to the end of the undergrad process. So I was, even up to that point, still telling myself, well, let's keep a backup option. But really, at the end of the day, the easiest way to succeed is not to have a backup option, because then failure is no longer on the table. But I think one of the biggest turning points for me, I was very lucky to, when I studied for my master's at IUP, I studied with Dr. Beacon, who was also my high school choir conductor. So we left one another for about 4 years, and then I found my way back. And I had a tough time transitioning through middle school, in that I was really kind of a fantastic boy soprano, and then my voice changed, and I had no idea what to do with it. So for almost a year, I sang in my falsetto well after changes had happened. So I would talk like a bass and attempt to sing the tenor part in falsetto. And so finally, I started taking private voice lessons over one summer, and I had just one breakthrough after another with him. And I remember this kind of culminated in, we purchased a block of, I think, 8 or so lessons. And it was in the 7th lesson, he had called my parents, and I didn't know. So I go in for my lesson. I lived right next to the school, so I would walk there. They didn't tell me anything was different. We had our lessons in the auditorium, and it was always dark. So I was on the stage, I was singing, and my parents were in the back. And so eventually he stops teaching me, and turns and is talking to someone, and I have no idea who he's talking to, and he's saying, it probably wasn't apparent before, especially with how Jordan sounded, but now that we've worked through this change, you need to be taking voice lessons. This is something that could and should become a career. This is not a marketing ploy because we want to feed our other voice teachers more students. He needs to keep studying. And so then I studied all the way through high school, and I got scholarships to continue, and it, the best option at that point, it always seemed like, well, I have enough eggs in this basket, I might as well keep going. And now I look back and I think I got to Harrison, where I'm directing just fantastic choirs and have excellent students. And the only reason I moved down to Florida was because I was in a school and I applied for a position, and I thought, well, what's the worst that could happen? I have enough eggs in this basket. I might as well throw my hat in the ring. And 10 years later, here we are.
That's a great story. So, who was he talking to? He was talking to your parents?
He was talking to my parents that were sitting in the back row that I couldn't see. So they had sat through the whole lesson to
kind of get them on to get them to understand.
Yes,
this is not
and
just
I was
a normal
singing.
thing.
I remember so vividly. I was singing. We had two songs. It was Vittoria, Vittoria, and a spiritual, a swing low, out of the bass baritone art song book.
Nice. And it's funny you say chemical engineering because a lot of my family are either chemists or they are chemical engineers. And so did you get a degree in chemical engineering, or how did that work?
I ended up not really finishing the chemical engineering degree, but there is a degree in general engineering, which is quite plainly kind of a cop-out degree. Uh-huh. But I had enough credits saved up that I went with that, and I thought, I'll be darned if I spent all of this time taking 24 credit hours a semester, and I only exit with one degree. But I still have students come today, and I had teachers laugh at me in the other schools because they would come to me and go, "Do you know how to do calculus?" And I would go, "Oh, bad memories, but yes." Or do you know how to do a Lewis dot diagram? And I thought, well, oddly enough, yes, I do know how to do Lewis dot diagrams.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you ever just break out engineering terms and things on your choirs?
Oh, yes. And sometimes I catch myself because I really think about my favorite was always fluid mechanics. And so I'll just go on tangents about the Bernoulli effect and how that creates the adduction between the vocal folds. And they're looking at me going, I left this class 2 periods ago. Please don't start. Please don't start this again.
Yeah. So how do they get, like, the students in Harrison, how do they get their, like, state requirements out of the way if they're taking all of these music classes?
So we take students that have to take 2 arts classes their freshman and sophomore year, and then 3 their junior and senior year. So there is enough room, and most of them do end up with extra space in their schedules. And even beyond that, we have so many students that will enter with at least 1 math credit or at least 1 foreign language credit, or sometimes both. And then there are many options to take classes online through Florida Virtual School as well. So I know almost all of my students take advantage of some or all of those opportunities or some combination thereof.
Yeah, that's great, and that there is that balance, and that they are dedicated and self-driven enough to be able to do that. Do you have a favorite musical experience, either as a conductor singer or as an audience member?
Oh, I can think of so many. I think that the ACDA Dallas convention, I guess that was in 2013.
I was there.
And 13?
Yeah, it was great.
Had out of all of the ACDA conventions, and I religiously go every year. Had two of the best concerts I have ever been in. The University of Louisville Cardinal Singers, and then the University of Kentucky Men's Chorus as well were both just astounding. And I have to say a third, and I think it's at that same convention, was the Choir of the West from Pacific Lutheran University.
Yes.
And I remember because University of Louisville and University of Kentucky Men's Chorus, those are two of the ensembles that everybody talks about, everyone gets excited for, everybody knows, and Kent Hatterberg and Dr. Johnson are both incredible conductors, and the literature is always astounding. But I remember sitting through the Pacific Lutheran concert, and that's one of the choirs that out on the eastern United States, anywhere east of the Mississippi, we don't really hear about them. No. And I remember looking around, and they had 3 pieces commissioned, and I think that was the premiere of the Eric Sessionwald's Northern Lights, if I'm not mistaken. And it was I think they got 3 standing ovations in one concert, and oh gosh, that was truly incredible.
Yeah, that was an unbelievable concert. They're all undergrad too.
Oh yeah, it's an only undergrad university, and
all these doctoral
I just remember looking around and like there were half of the audience had their jaws on the floor, and the other half were looking at the jaws on the floor because nobody had expected that coming. But so I think that convention was definitely one of the turning points. I've been privileged enough to perform at a number of ACDA conventions myself. One in Cincinnati with the Miami University Men's Glee Club, and that was an incredibly moving concert as a singer. And I think just about equally moving as a singer was the North Central ACDA convention in 2010, in which we performed when I was in high school, which I think kind of brings me to my next and the most recent kind of astounding and happy moment. In the 2010 concert, our commissioned piece was a piece, I Am Not Yours, the arrangement by David Dickow. And so we got to work a number of times with Dr. Dickow on that piece before performing it at the convention, and I was elated on Tuesday, and this I think speaks to the strength of our choirs at Harrison. I passed out that piece, and I've been wanting to do it as a singer or a conductor for the last 8 years, and I finally decided this was the time. So we passed it out, and in one rehearsal we made it. We can make it cover to cover on words, and the joy and the memories that came flooding back were something I'm not going to forget for a while, and I'm really looking forward to doing that piece in our spring semester.
Yeah, that's great. I was in a reading session yesterday, and I think we sang through that song. It's very nice. So what do you get out of coming to conferences like this in ACDA?
Seeing new techniques, and honestly, it's not about seeing new techniques. For me personally, it's about remembering all of the things that I already know. I tend to, as a conductor, have extreme tunnel vision, and I will find an area that I believe is defective, or are most defective, and I will zone in on that and try to achieve perfection. And so it's nice to come to these conventions and realize, oh yes, there are other things that I need to be worrying about. So I know that my choirs are really, really sick and tired of working on a properly formed O vowel, because I think we've had about I guess, a 15-month journey on that one. From day one, I walked into the classroom, and there's a little bit of Southern dialect, and I wanted as as we would find in Minnesota, not as we find in the South, and and I embarked on a crusade, and I think finally we are getting there, but it's always a nice reminder that there are in fact other things that we need to work on other than the O vowel. So that's one of the big things is being reminded of all of the techniques that sometimes, I even look back and I looked at some of the rehearsal videos that I still had from my first year of teaching, and I remember thinking, like, oh gosh, that's a great technique. Why didn't I do that? And it's these opportunities are always great for reflection and in finding, I had 4 years of undergrad and 2 years of grad school where all we did was dump ideas and techniques into the brain, and remembering all of them at the same time is essentially impossible, I think. So so that's one of the great things. The other things, or the other thing that I do a lot of is networking, finding out who is out there, who is facing similar struggles that I'm facing, who's facing struggles that I have faced in the past, who is telling me about struggles that I have that I didn't even know I had until they told me, and how can we help one another? When is a good time? When can we do a joint concert? When can I collaborate with another ensemble? That's always one of my big pushes. I took it for granted the high school and middle school experience that I had, but I remember even in middle school we would have choirs from across the Des Moines metro or across the state. They would come in high school. We would have choirs and universities come in, and we would sing for them and they would sing for us, and we would sing things together. And it wasn't until that I became a music educator myself that I realized that doesn't happen for students 3 or 4 times a semester like it did for me. And it was really eye-opening that was not something that's commonplace. And so I always try to do my best to have that collaboration and incorporate that collaboration into what we do.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's half the reason why I'm doing this kind of podcast thing. Is just not only talk with people from around the country, but specifically here in Florida, where I'm now teaching, because I didn't go to school in Florida here. I'm in a very small county. I just happen to be part of Polk, which we're right next to. I'm one of 2 high schools in my county, and so this is half the reason why I'm doing this. And I do get a lot out of just talking with other choir directors. So to kind of wrap things up, can you talk about your upcoming program for this semester for some of your choirs?
Sure. It's a crazy busy semester for us. We always cringe because sometimes we will have, in the month of December, Harrison will have, in a 4-week time span, over 30 things on the calendar, which is more than 2 a day. And so sometimes we are out performing somewhere in the morning for a luncheon, and then we also have a performance in the evening. So I always look forward to the new semester, except this year I think our January is worse than before. So we are trying to put together a year-long kind of repertoire theme that is focused around the concept of love. And it's not always the same types of love. So our chamber singers is doing... right now, I think we'll end up doing 7 or 8 pieces this semester. So we'll have I Am Not Yours. We will have the Eric Jessenwald's Long Road. And then a Morales motet. There's a piece called Luk Luk Lumbu, which is an Indonesian piece that kind of looks at Indonesian marital ceremonies in a rather fun way. So we're doing some of those things. We have the women singing El Vito, and a Brahms arrangement of Ständchen for women's chorus and mezzo solo. I'm lucky enough that I have 2 students that I think are more than capable of the mezzo solo, so we're happy to also feature them. The men's chorus will be singing some Brahms. We have Herbstlied, which is in a set of 6 Brahms pieces. We'll sing an arrangement of Lachlomand. So those are kind of what we're looking at for the choral things. A number of things that I am very excited about. We have a women's chorus piece that I composed back in grad school as kind of a tangent to an assignment we did. So our assignment was in a music theory class to look at a Brahms piano work and then look at and digest, and we could do a number of things for the final project. And my final project was that I arranged it for the choirs that I thought I would have the following year at St. Ursula Academy in Toledo. So it's for women's chorus and 2 cellos. So I took the piano sonata and put it with some words by Sarah Teasdale. And so we will sing that piece, and then we are also having another piece commissioned this year, which will be for our chamber singers, and that is a piece that I'm really, really excited about, that process. What we've done is we knew that the theme of this year would be love, and so we reached out to our creative writing department, and one of their assignments for the entire department was to write love poems. And they were given the heads up that it does not always have to be a happy love or one type of love or another. And the creative writing teacher picked his top 10 pieces, which were all really, really fantastic. And I passed those on to a composer and said, what poem speaks to you the most? And ready, set, go. We can do just about any type of ensemble or any type of choir paired with whatever instruments you'd like, because you're Harrison. We have that at Harrison, and it is a luxury. So that's what our concert programs look like for this upcoming semester.
Yeah, that's fantastic that you're not only getting a piece commissioned, but you're collaboratively working within your school and department, and that's fantastic. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.